what I wanted to do is I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of the book that tells how I got started on doing this journey, which took me from New York south down to here across the country, across the south to Arizona, and then straight up north to Montana, and then eventually to the Arctic, just north of the Brooks Range to the Arctic Ocean. And so this might explain some of the reasons why I decided to take this trip. When setting out on a journey, I always take note of the light. In this way, I orient myself and track my course. And so, from my hospital bed this morning, awaiting surgery to repair a busted heart valve, I look out at the dawning wintry sky through windows streaked with New York City soot and note that though my view extends across the East River and its phalanx of still lighted bridges, I see no sign of the sun. I wonder what this gloom might portend, perhaps because some primal part of me believes light has meaning, that sunlight brings clarity and hope, that an overcast sky invites vagueness and disappointment. Or I might just be feeling the effects of whatever drugs they gave me a couple hours ago. While still dark, they wheeled me into an examining room, stood me up under harsh lights, threaded a tube from my groin to my heart, and through it streamed a dye that searched for arterial blockages. I had to be awake, the doctors explained from behind their blue masks, and I understood this to mean that there was nothing to be done for the pain that accompanied the tubing's every vermiculation. If they found nothing, that was good, and they would operate. For most of my life, I've been aware of my murmuring heart. Whenever I'm alone in the car at my desk, lying in bed, I can feel it. I can count its beats and until I fall asleep. I've even timed my hiking to its rhythm. Sometimes my heart gulps as if it's trying to swallow something too large. Sometimes it leaps in double time. I never thought this was unusual. I thought everyone could hear his or her heart. So with the dull dawn beginning to get to me, I find myself thinking what I'll do come spring. And realize this is what we all think when stricken by wintry doubts. We think, come spring, and mean that we're ready for change, and that we'll get to it in the season when everything around us begins changing, when vagueness fades, and we can proceed with purpose, one with the greening shoots, swelling buds, and lengthening days, attuned to Earth's durable rhythms of light and time. Even those of us whose lives might be barely touched by nature the rest of the year will, come spring, be seduced into a hazy synesthesia wherein smells beget hopes and light induces longings. How does it happen? I recall, let me just read this section here because, In my hospital bed, I closed my eyes and recalled the springs of my past. Remember the first day when it was suddenly warm enough to ride my bike to school or take out my baseball glove, oiled, folded over a hardball in its pocket, and stored all winter with a rubber band around it, and could quit flipping cards across the bedroom floor while it snowed outside. On the first warm days with the kids on the playground, my wife and I would sit with the rest of the parents on the sun-soaked park benches. My first spring hike always took me up to the Kittatinny Ridge on the rocky overlook over the Delaware Water Gap, where the low-bush blueberries and mountain laurel had just begun to bud. Along the river below, as the spring waters receded, the banks burst forth with tangled vines of wild roses and strawberries. I'm now ready for spring forest, the spring forest in its mist, spring in its musk, in its spring greens, its canopy green, shafts of wild iris green, understory green, diatom green and slow-running stream, buoyant sun-dappled lily-pad green, and rime-varnished watercress green. I'm all the more ready for spring, I confess, because I'm feeling that my most verdant years are behind me. Little love, big love, lost love, people lost, time passing. I knew my great-grandparents, immigrants who spoke very little English, and so talked to me, their beloved first American great-grandchild, with such a wild vocabulary of gestures, chucks, pinches, and grins, that I was more frightened than comprehending. I enjoyed the lavish love of grandparents and the fretful love of my parents. And then I watched my father suffer long years and my mother tender him ceaseless attention. He died only a year ago, 6 months before my own diagnosis, and the last time I saw him, I knew it would be the last time. He lay beneath the hospital sheets, and his large frame seemed to have no mass at all. His hawk brown eyes worked to remain keen. I imagined a grueling palaver going on behind them. Disabled by successive surgeries, he spent most of his last years doing battle with his body. Everyone admired his tenaciousness, mistaking it for a will to live. I was convinced that he lived only for the love of his grandchildren, whom I realized he recognized the transformative energy possessed by growing, blossoming, transmuting things. They were of him, the wellspring of his persevering, as well as his offspring. We can't be children and just spring again, but being intimate with such energy is every bit as good as being a part of it. And so we're affected when spring comes with its spawning, nesting, breeding, brooding, rising lignin, peeping peepers, its skunk cabbage and mayapple, crocus and magnolia bloom, dandelion and daffodil. When spring comes on the wind and osprey call from familiar hangs. When shorebirds flash across the marsh at dusk. When songbirds sweep into forest to chirrup May, and butterflies flutter on solitary flights. When all flock determinedly north, fishes up ancestral streams, salmon, shad, quicksilver schools of herring, and big-eyed, hag-faced lamprey. We sow crops, play ball, leave our jackets on the playground at recess. We're free and in shirt sleeves, and then comes Hinamatsuri, Holy, Passover, Easter, and Rowan Fest. Then comes light, resurrection, renewal, joy of survival from heart surgery, joy of spring. When, effused Gerard Manley Hopkins, weeds and wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. And when D.H. Lawrence wondered, what fountain of fire am I among this leaping combustion? Then we want to be a part of it all. Better come quick, for I hear the gurney rattling down the hall. Let's go, says the masked man. Between the quick hands of the attendants, I catch glimpses of my wife, my mother, and my younger son. The bed rails collapse with the clacking of an ironing board being closed. Someone gives me an injection. I see lights pass as if I'm half asleep in a cab passing through the city after midnight. I'm wheeled into a cold room with a stainless steel ceiling. In this room, the surgeons take my life from me by chilling my body temperature to 77 degrees and injecting a cold potassium solution that stops my heart for a 2-hour break after 53 years of beating its offbeat rhythm. While the heart-lung machine pumps cooled blood through my hypothermic body, the surgeons do their work. This is not your old-fashioned hacksaw the sternum pry open the ribcage surgery, but a refined post-millennial procedure accomplished with nanocameras and instruments, which went right into the heart through an incision made beneath my right breast that the surgeon manipulates from outside my body like an unseen godlike puppeteer, deftly working his marionettes. Anyway, I survived the heart surgery, which was pretty grim. But through the whole time and for the rest of the season, what struck me was the connection of light and the increase in light and the energy provided by light, not only to me as I began to come out from this heart surgery, but to the world around me that I was seeing. And so while I was still, when I just got out of the hospital, I don't know if anyone has had that kind of surgery, but after you get out of it, you don't walk too well, you don't move too well, you kind of shuffle along like that. I don't know if you remember, there's a mafia guy in New York City who used to pretend he was crazy and shuffle around Greenwich Village in his bedroom slippers and bathrobe. And that's kind of what I felt like when I was after this heart surgery. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and if you ever have a lot of time on your hands, take up The Golden Bough, which is Sir James Fraser's 19th century classic on anthropology and the relationship of cultures and myths and rituals and fables that are shared between different cultures. And the research is extraordinary. But to Fraser, who had studied all these cultures, there seemed no paradigm more overarching than that of spring's rebirth. Could the primitive savage be certain that the luminary, the sun, would ever retrace his heavenly road? It was natural, therefore, that with such thoughts and fears he should have done all that in him lay to bring back the faded blossom to the bough, to swing the low sun of winter up to its old place in the summer sky. Throughout December, I walk on a primitive's watch as darkness comes earlier, more holiday lights of Christmas and Hanukkah appear. The world is still inspired by ancient rituals devised in the hope that the right magic, the right fire at the right time, will affect the course of natural events and spur on the solstice. That day, December 1st, the shortest day of the year, the transition from winter to spring begins. Soon whole blocks stand festooned. In the week before Christmas, carolers stroll from house to house with lit tapers. My own home, we begin the 8-day celebration of Hanukkah that commemorates the rededication of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. In this spirit, each night we add another candle to the 8-armed menorah, so that, like the sun after the winter solstice, each day will burn a little brighter. Christmas finds its sun in the actual birth of a God whose light the wise men followed to his birthplace. In the nativities of Correggio, Murillo, and Caravaggio, light infusing the dawn at the birth of Christ dawns all the brighter on the face of the newborn. The lighted creches on front lawns recreate the same scene. One I see features life-size plastic figures illuminated from within. They're all there. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, Rudolph, Mickey, and Goofy. They're all there. That the church placed the birth of Jesus on the day that pagans celebrated the return of the sun is no coincidence. They did it, writes Fraser, in order to transfer the devotion of the heathen from the sun to him who is called the Son of Righteousness. And then Christ, like all the other gods that secured the light in midwinter, Tammuz, Attis, Adonis, will die young. These gods must die so they don't live through the year's corruption and decay, the wintry exigencies of life that we mortals must experience. And so they might be resurrected again come spring. Again, it's the combinations of light and its connection not only to growth and increase and change, but to myths and rituals. The most recent ritual of which we just passed was Groundhog Day. And I did go to, there's a section in the book on going to Groundhog Day. Because I grew up in Pennsylvania and never had been there. And it's pretty crazy, although the scene that they show in the movie is far more calm than actually the event is, because there's about overall maybe 100,000 people who have been drinking all day and night, waiting for the groundhog to appear. And they've been standing out in the cold, drinking and eating kielbasa. And by the time the groundhog appears, nobody cares what it's trying to say. So, but the whole idea of the light is, and the problem with this groundhog, in particular in the Punxsutawney Phil in Pennsylvania, is that he wouldn't know if it was winter or spring, because he lives all year round in the Punxsutawney Public Library in a cage eating dog food and ice cream. So he has no idea what time it is, but they bring him on anyway. But the fact that we still, after all these years, celebrate this day in winter, and at what is essentially is the cross-quarter day. February 2nd falls, there's the solstice, and then there's the equinox, and in between you have February 2nd, which is the cross-quarter, which is celebrated by sects all the way through history. The Catholics celebrate Candlemas on February 2nd. It's the same day. And again, with lights and lighting candles coming through the churches. And Jesus, that celebrates the day supposedly when Mary brought Jesus into the temple for the first time, and he was recognized there as the God of light, as the coming of the light. And so this whole connection of light and spring is something that has had an effect on life and ritual, and it's all just due to the 23.5 degree relationship of the Earth on its axis to the sun. So, but in fact, the word spring doesn't come into the English language, until about 16th century. Before then, spring was a spring of water, and what they referred to, what spring was the Lenten season, which meant the days were lengthening. It comes from the German root to lengthen. And with the advent of Christianity, pagan festivals that happened around that season gained the imprimatur of the church by dint of their concurrence with the 40 days before Easter, during which the observant Catholic vows to forgo some particular pleasure or another, usually the eating of meat. The Italians called this practice carne levare, the leaving of flesh, and so the week before the start of Lent, known as Holy Week, also became known as Carnival. Especially among the Latinate Catholics, the French, Spanish, and Italians, Holy Week became a time for indulging in drink, food, and masquerades. Lent began on Ash Wednesday. The day before, Shrove Tuesday, was officially set aside for shriving, confessing one's sins. Since eggs and fat were forbidden during Lent, people ate them heartily on Shrove Tuesday, which became known as Fat Tuesday. Fat Tuesday is French for Mardi Gras. So again, you have this connection with the changing in light. Mardi Gras comes up this month at the end of the month, and in some ways, even a celebration like the Super Bowl Sunday is a midwinter celebration that seems to have replaced a lot of other celebrations that the Romans called Lupercalia, which they celebrated at this time of year. And all these kinds of celebrations with music and all this stuff and parades are always there to mark the movement into the sunlight. So what I decided to do, when I decided to travel across country, I lived in New York City, so I don't have a car. So I had to get a car. And this friend of mine, who's a philosophy professor at NYU, said I could borrow his mom's car. She had died at age 90 and left him this car, which was a 1984 Chevy Impala, which he claimed was in great shape, but I didn't necessarily believe him. So we went up to see this car before I actually decided to take it on the road. My friend's name is Miles. Miles and I head up to Connecticut to retrieve the Chevy. It is at a small summer cottage with a large garage. Miles has a rusted key for the rusted padlock. We open the lock, swing out the large garage door, and even in the shadows I can see that this is not just a car. A Heidegger scholar doesn't lie. This is a classic. It fairly takes my breath away. This is huge, really huge. A white body four-door with a 1980s slant, the front end riding higher than the rear. I move aside a couple of bicycles and a folding table and open the car's big door. The roof light comes on and I peer inside. It's got a cavernous interior of cobalt blue cloth, a hood that stretches out to its own horizon, and a trunk that I'm sure can hold both being and nothingness. Nothing digital here, nothing automatic except the transmission. The radio has push buttons, and you have to muscle down your own window if you want to adjust the side view mirror. The car has a bench seat big enough to sleep on, a dash shelf a foot deep, and a glove compartment that could house a large cat. The most amazing of all is the odometer. In 20 years, the car has traveled only 28,000 miles. I lift the hood. The engine is a museum exhibit. We used to say when we turned on the ignition of a car that a car came to life. We said this because cars once looked and felt like this one, big machines into which we mortals like to feel we breathed life. This car doesn't have a trace of ergonomic sissification. No cruise control, no lumbar support, no cup holders. This car is yearning for a new life, to be out on the open road. Miles and I decide to call him Dick, after Moby. I take the key, turn it, and the big white whale of a car comes to life. So that was the car I drove cross country. Came down here, was one of the first places I came to. And so I can read some of my visit to here, which was interesting. This is April 12th, and each of the chapters of the book follows the change in light. So this April 12th is 12 hours and 59 minutes of daylight. And the book began when my heart surgery was at 9 hours and 43 minutes of daylight. So as I travel, I'm gaining light and end up eventually in the Arctic with 24 hours of daylight. So that's the progress of the book. As it turns out, I talk about coming to here. As it turns out, it's Schlesinger. You know him. Who meets me at Duke's 8,000-acre experimental forest. A tall, balding, gently robust man in a dark suit wearing large eyeglasses. Your glasses were bigger, I think, last time. They were okay. He wastes no time getting us out to his future world in the woods. Everyone thought that if trees and soils were going to take up all the excess carbon dioxide, we might reach a utopic state where we could still burn fossil fuels and just let simulated plant growth take up the emissions. People said not to worry. The forests of the U.S. were taking up large quantities of emissions. I said, what forests are these? All of the research before ours had been done in greenhouses with pot-grown plants. This didn't apply to real nature or realistically include the competition between plants duking it out for nitrogen and phosphorus. May the best tree win. So we decided the only way to do was to do a big experiment outdoors. If we didn't find the uptake effects in these loblolly forests, we wouldn't find it anywhere. So we go out into the forest, and I assume most of you have all been out there and seen all that. The results in the initial years of experiments, tree growth went up 25%. Within 2 years, the production of cones and seeds went up 300%, with 3 times as many seeds in the experimental plots than in the controls. But the big change was below ground in the roots. There's been an 80% increase in roots. My interpretation is that when you add CO2, the trees increase their rate of photosynthesis, which means they have all these carbohydrates, but they don't have enough nitrogen or phosphorus or water. So they take all the CO2 and build roots. Root systems put carbon into the soil, but it doesn't just sit there. Soil has its own respiratory system, says Schlesinger. Carbon storage increases between stems, forest floor, and soil, but at a certain point, the soil can hold only so much. When spring rains soak the ground, the interactions of microbes, minerals, and carbon recreate carbon dioxide. What was interesting about this to me is the respiration idea of the soil was that before I came down here, I had gone to Rockefeller University to visit a scientist who actually studied had actually devised, in the name of David Mazeral, who had actually devised a way to hear the exhalations, the sense of the gases, the excess gases from the plants. And so, as he would say to me, a spinach leaf sounds different than a oak leaf, and he had been able to distinguish the sounds that these plants made. So the whole idea of respiration, for me, had a very real sense at that point. So it was almost as if when I traveled sometimes, I had this sense of photosynthesis having this huge sound. When you started to see things growing, you just imagine this great cacophony of exhalations of gases from plants. So anyway, so I went there, and one of the reasons what I wanted to distinguish between the research here and the research that I saw, or the end of the research that I saw in Arizona at the biosphere. Anyone ever been to the biosphere in Arizona? Oh, you were there. It was a pretty weird place. It's outside of Tucson, and let me just I'm on my way to Boulder because my next trip from Arizona, I'm going up to the top of the Rockies, 12,000 feet, to go with scientists who are measuring the snowpack to test the climate change effects. But before that, I decided I'm going to stop at this place that I'd seen outside of Tucson. It's Biosphere 2, the ghost town of the future. In Oracle, Arizona, 30 miles north of Tucson, I pull off onto a winding drive and follow the signs until a shimmering complex appears, a vision of a past futurist future, a development of glare-reflecting white buildings topped with geodesic domes and ziggurats of concrete, metal, and darkened glass. The scene reminds me of something from the illustrated books on space travel that captivated my childhood imagination. painterly representations of planets, passenger rockets, and moon bases, whose unearthly and daring conceptions I would pore over each night in my bedroom, and that, along with the words weightlessness, other worlds, and future, held me spellbound. The structures at Oracle provide an impression no less provocative, sprawling across the caftan sands of the Sonoran Desert before a backdrop of eroded foothills and distant high mountains. The whole thing appears to have dropped out of the sky. It's anime art, a lost world that never existed, a glaring anachronism. Imagine opening a tomb and finding a mummy in chrome-framed sunglasses. The place appears deserted, not just deserted, but as if everyone had just been vaporized. One expects ray guns and André Courrèges designer space outfits, but the woman who materializes at the front desk seems unarmed and is clearly no moon girl. The tour, she utters in a low voice, begins in 20 minutes. I nod. Out there, she adds, pointing to the shaded patio. Temperature is about 100 degrees out there in Tucson, this building. I buy a ticket and walk through a series of exhibit kiosks and a little souvenir shop. No other visitors appear. I enter one of the vacant, darkened little theaters, sit on a bench and watch the history of biosphere told in stills and film clips, edited with a newsreel's urgent pace, earnest voice, and portentous soundtrack. This will be, I'm told, the story of a heroic scientific endeavor, built ahead of its time, an ultimate engineering triumph, to replicate Earth's major ecosystems, seas, coral reefs, marshes, deserts, rainforests, within a sealed and self-sustaining system where all air and water will be recycled. The plants and animals inside will live their natural lives, and the humans will thrive on a small but sustainable harvest. A spaceship Earth. This enclosed ecosystem will be the model for future space colonies and teach those of us left behind how to live a more sustainable existence. Some rich men build model ships in bottles. Texas billionaire Edward Bass wanted to build a model Earth in a bottle. More, he wanted the model to be alive, with plants, animals, and most of all, humans. Outside in the blinding afternoon sun, I meet up with the rest of those in the tour, a family of 3 and a grandmother with her teenage granddaughter. We're greeted by our stout guide, Bill, who, despite there being only 6 of us, chooses to use his electronic megaphone. This is Biosphere 2. Biosphere 1, he informs us, is the Earth. As we approach the main glass and steel building, Bill itemizes the pertinent details. Completed in 1991 at a cost of some $150 million, the enclosed and sealed Biosphere 2 covers some 3.5 acres. 6,500 panes of glass cover the domes, which, when the system was up and running, held 7 million cubic feet of air, 30,000 tons of soil, and 3,800 species of plants and animals. Above the 79 million gallon aquarium, mechanical waves washed across a coral reef 3 times a minute. In the enclosed rainforest, sprinklers sprayed 120 inches of rain a year. There was a virtual coastal mangrove and a virtual coastal desert. There was even a quarter called the farm where the biospherians, as those who lived within the biosphere chose to call themselves, could raise crops, pigs, and fish. It was, Bill says with ardor, a 20th century ark, left high and dry in the 21st century. We had 10 species of ant and 5 species of roaches. We had katydids, butterflies, moths, snakes, toads, lizards, and bush babies. They're all gone, except the ants. Except, in fact, a single species of ant that killed off all the others, and now, as we can see from the columns of them swarming everywhere we look, have the run of the place. I'd call them biospherians. We follow Bill along a catwalk suspended 30 feet above the ruins of the ecotones below. Here and there, a few hardy specimens persist, a banana tree that still bears fruit, a thorn acacia, a wiry frankincense tree, a mescal plant, and a hanging garden in leguminous tatters. He points to some barren ground where, he tells us, cottonwoods used to grow, sometimes as much as 8 inches in a week. I have the wilting feeling I get when I return to my apartment after a long trip and see my dried-out houseplants. He leads us down under the ecodome, where large tanks recycled water from each of the ecosystems. Every tank had a backup tank. We stand at the edge of the 250,000-gallon water reservoir designed to recycle the entire system once every 2 years. And then the true marvel of engineering, the great lung of the biosphere, a black rubbery membrane the size of a circus tent. The flexible membrane allows a 16-ton steel disc 90 feet in diameter to rise and fall with the daily increase and decreases of oxygen in the biosphere. The Earth itself does breathe like this. One of ecology's great discoveries was that during the spring, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere decrease because leafing plants use it for photosynthesis, and conversely, in the winter, CO2 levels increase. The same thing happens, although not as dramatically each day and night. As a consequence, in the closed system, the biosphere engineers had created oxygen levels rose during the day as a result of all the plant respiration, and oxygen levels fell each night. They thought they had thought of everything. Their creation could breathe. In September 1991, 8 biospherians, 4 men and 4 women, entered Biosphere 2, and the door, referred to, I guess, as an airlock, shut behind them. In July 1992, the Biosphere 2 Scientific Advisory Committee issued a report to the chairman of Space Ventures, Biosphere Ventures, Committee Chairman Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, then Assistant Secretary of Environmental Affairs for the Smithsonian Institution and later to become Chief Biodiversity Advisor at the World Bank, reported, quote, "The committee is in agreement that the conception and construction of Biosphere 2 were acts of vision and courage," unquote. In September 1992, the team doctor pronounced all the biospherians, despite having lost 16% of their pre-biosphere body weight, in excellent health due to their, quote, nutrient-dense diet. In October 1992, 4 biospherians cast absentee ballots in national, state, and local elections from inside the biosphere. In October 1993, the Biosphere 2 crew came back out into the world of Biosphere 1. Although all seemed to have gone right, amid the media hype and self-congratulations, questions arose suggesting that much had, in fact, gone very wrong. The sealed system had, in fact, been opened and adjusted many times during the course of the 2 years. Oxygen had been lost through the concrete foundation. An especially overcast Arizona winter kept the plants from peak photosynthesis, and so they failed to absorb enough CO2, and it built up inside to the point that Biosphere 2 underwent its own little nuclear winter. The greenhouse had suffered its own greenhouse effect. CO2 scrubbers were secretly installed, and yet oxygen levels continued to drop. For a time, the biospherians lived with oxygen levels equivalent to those in the Himalayas. Food crops failed. Food intake suffered. Reports came out that John Allen, the enigmatic biospherian who first sold the idea to Bass, was more cultist than ecologist, more Barnum than Odom. A mining engineer with a business degree from Harvard, Allen was also a poet and playwright who wrote under the nom de plume Johnny Dolphin. The names of the entities Allen created to oversee Biosphere, Space Biosphere Ventures, the Institute of Ecotechnics, had the ring of science fiction, although Allen wouldn't be the last to take advantage of the instant significance of eco or bio leads to almost anything. To many scientists, Biosphere appeared to be more theater than science. Although for a few good years of its run, the public, and not a few scientists, thought Biosphere at Oracle might give them answers to some big questions. Perhaps there was just something in the air. A few years ago, geologists discovered that in Delphi, Greece, at the site of the 4th century BC Oracle, faults in the rock of the mountain released fumes beneath the Earth's surface. Among these, pneuma, as the Greeks called them, the geologists found ethylene, a gas that when inhaled causes reactions from euphoria to delirium to violent frenzy. So it turns out that the divining priestesses were probably high as glue sniffers. The oracle's prophecies were a ritual that required from those who sought advice a willing suspension of disbelief. Biosphere required the same. A short time after it closed its doors, Biosphere contracted with Columbia University to take over the facility as an experimental laboratory. But after a few years, the expense of running the place became too great, and they quit the desert, concluding that Biosphere 1 was in greater need of their attention. Another guide, Rod, a Broadchester man with a soft white mustache, tells me he was head of safety for the Biosphere. "I once had 100 people under me," he says, "and now there's only me." Safety marshal and tour guide of a defunct Biosphere. As I leave, a soury summer rain begins to fall, and as I drive west toward Texas, across what may be the flattest land in the universe, I consider again Jim's basic approach to the world. This was a friend of mine who's a botanist. "I always ask myself," he says, "why things are where they are. Not why things are the way they are. Why not? Nature never has a time when things are what they are. In nature, unlike in the course of human events, beginnings and endings don't exist. Despite its appeal to ecology, Biosphere 2 was essentially a political happening, and in many ways a perverse one. To even conceive of the idea of shaping an ecological utopia, a bioengineered Eden, presumes some kind of actual control over everything. It was an attempt at ecological eugenics. That this $150 million experiment could be wrecked by a cloudy Arizona winter speaks of the dubiousness of intelligent ecosystem design and the hubris in thinking that we can replace a lost forest, wetland, or vernal pool. Even if you thought you knew everything that went into the making of a rainforest or coral reef, the idea of capturing that place and time would be a fool's errand. Nature is neither a sealed system nor a scripted series. It has no intelligent design or designer. It's always open to the chance event, the singular moment, cell meets chloroplast, water drop meets rock. For all these reasons, the scientists trying to understand what a warmer Earth and Earth with an altered atmosphere will be like know only that they can't know for sure, no matter how many computer models they come up with. But not knowing with certainty is not the same as not knowing at all. Did the surgeon know for certain that the outcome would be if I had not had heart surgery? He did know, however, that I had a damaged heart, and that the damage was beginning to take a toll on the rest of my system. I thought this was knowledge enough. That humans have altered the Earth's atmosphere and that the altered atmosphere is beginning to take a toll on the rest of the Earth's systems is very clear, although often what's cause and what's effect, what's elemental and what's extraneous, what's primary and what's feedback remain elusive. For instance, should the melting of the Greenland ice add enough fresh water to the ocean so global ocean currents slow and the Gulf Stream no longer reaches north, the result could be a quick reversal of climatic fortunes. Oddly enough, after years of warming, the world may very suddenly turn cold. So the cold will mostly affect North America. There'll be water shortages, maybe food shortages, more floods, more droughts that could potentially destabilize, as this report from the government put it, geopolitical environment. A real oracle would be useful just about now. So I just have one more thing I'd like to read. I traveled through this up to the Rockies, and the journey ended up in the Arctic, which was, to me, the most extraordinary place I'd ever been, and it's still hard to believe that I was there, and would love to go. Would go back in a second. It's really an amazing place. I took a bush plane. This pilot and his wife were both. She was a pilot as well, and we flew this wonderful red, bright fire engine red Otter. It was called, and it's a single engine plane, but he had changed it to a jet turbine or whatever, and a turboprop, and so it was just, and then he could fly this thing and land on a glacier in the Arctic. He'd just come right into the crater on the top of the glacier and land this thing. It was just terrific. So anyway, land the Brooks. The only thing he was disappointed, in fact, was at the Brooks Range. The mountains were only 9,000 feet, and he was more used to 12,000 feet mountains, and these were no challenge to him. So, but we landed on a mountain near Mount Chamberlain, which is the highest peak in Anwar. And in our view, just to the northeast, rather than being scooped out, the top of the mountain is a dome of snow, and Paul puts us right in the center. As we walk the perimeter of this skyscraping island, there is nothing to obstruct or way to describe a view that extends at least 100 miles in every direction, across the northern foothills of the Brooks to the fog-bound Arctic Ocean shore, across the descending peaks east to Canada, and across the craggy, snow-crested mountains south and west. Call it, as the 18th century writers might, an infinite, perhaps ethereal vast. Nowadays, a Viewmaster vast or an IMAX vast. But seeing it is only part of it, the part that takes my breath away for sure. But even more compelling is the dynamic juxtaposition of ice peaks, flowing waters, spreading valleys, and cold, distant ocean that engages the imagination. I ask myself how I feel up here, and once I get past imagining I feel what I'm supposed to feel, I realize I feel neither humbled nor insignificant, just the opposite. I find my senses trying to meet the challenge they're being presented. After all these months chasing spring here to its apogee, I know that however still and immutable this landscape may seem, it is so full of energy and transformations that it's practically jumping out of its frame. To the right ears, the sound of photosynthesis would be deafening. Perhaps I'm actually seeing time and space. I try to recall whether physicists found the universe finite and unbounded or infinite and bounded, and wondering which this is. Maybe I'm feeling high and mighty from the altitude, but I conclude that the universe of spring is neither Euclidean nor Newtonian. As Einstein wrote, the concept of space as something existing objectively and independently of things belongs to pre-scientific thought, but not so the idea of existence of an infinite number of spaces in motion relative to each other. This comes close. On the mountaintop up here in spring, where, as Einstein put it, physicists believe that the separation between past, present, and future is only an illusion. We fly down from the summits of the Brook Range, across the rolling foothills and out onto the sprawling tundra of the coastal plain. Here, the many streams that rush off the mountains become mired in the sand and gravel they push downstream ahead of them. They flow where they can amid dense thickets of dwarf willow. Paul spots some caribou and lands us in the lower Congacut, about a half-mile from the herd. He gauges the direction of the wind to keep the caribou from smelling us, and we begin our hike across gravel beds and through the streams that separate them. Beyond the braided channels that we're slogging through lies a low rise, a meadow of greening tundra. If we can reach the last hedgerow, we'll be behind a blind, barely 100 yards from the herd. We stay low and say nothing. We're close enough now that we're practically crawling through the dense thickets. When we're as far as we can go, we realize the only place to stand will be in mud and water. But we've come this far, and the view through the blind is like peering into a great cathedral through the crack between the doors. As it turns out, we're just in time to see the congregation filing in. From every low slope we see them coming, herds of hundreds joining aggregation of thousands. They saunter in loose formation, large deer on gangly legs, many with fluff-tailed young, no more than a couple weeks old, scampering alongside, some trying to grab a teat and suckle on the run. Once and again, an adult raises its head and pricks up its ears, seemingly aware of our presence, but then moves on, perhaps feeling safe among such numbers. Wet and cramped, we watch their march for hours. And for hours, under a vast blue sky, they continue to arrive, pass by our blind, and move toward the sea, gradually becoming silhouettes in the distant flat plain, the place where the natives believe life is born. Their spring journeys began about the same time as mine, and here is where both our journeys end. The synchrony in this place, in this time of never-ending sun, fills me with inexpressible joy. And so the last day, take a kayak down the river, and then we camp out. I lie in my sleeping bag. The crystal blue river runs close by. Terns and gulls wing low and skirt the wind. Above, the continuous sun, the yellow of powdered sulfur, as much light as aura, feels like a prize won. What is best about this place I've come to is that it is not meant for you or me at all. For us, it's a place where for the moment, past, present, and future are all one and inexorable, where the senses and the spirit find refuge. But for how long? Timelessness isn't what it used to be. What will your and my children's and grandchildren's springs be like? Will the poetry of the season still make sense to them? Will spring remain as full of energy and omens and just as radiant and manifest? Will they be able to head out in spring to recover their hearts and find places like this to lie out in the open and ask themselves why they themselves are where they are? As my grandmother would have put it, I've been and gone. Not come and gone, but actually established my being somewhere before going. It won't make leaving this bright place, this luminous season, any easier. But come February, when snowmelt begins, when the soil moistens, when the first warm rains fall, I know I'll be thinking thoughts of spring, ready for the vernal rush, more aware and more appreciative than ever of each new minute of light that marks the rising arc of the sun. See spring for yourself. See spring now because it's changing. All things are changing beneath the sun. See it now.